Lesson 7, Darkness and Shadow.
In 2021, I worked on an assembly line. To get Saturdays off, I had to take half of Friday off to ensure they didn't schedule me for Saturday. It was a clever way to have an extended weekend without using more personal time off, PTO. I was often excited to start a long weekend, but I didn't feel much like working those few hours to earn the right to leave. We cannot avoid challenging work. Whether it's addressing trauma, getting healthy, or building lawnmower engines, there are a necessary number of difficult things. We assume things could be avoided, but they do not go away. The outside wall of my house where the paint is peeling will only worsen over time. If I do not address it, it will eventually cause more damage. A great revelation for me was spiritual bypassing. Religion often searches for magical answers and avoids doing the necessary work to heal. Dealing with trauma is uncomfortable, so we use religious phrases and platitudes to avoid the messy but necessary work that could heal us. One reason we avoid challenging work is our obsession with light. In our dualistic mindsets, we categorized everything difficult and not easily understood as darkness. We focused on what we considered light and trusted it would extinguish the darkness. There are things to be frightened of, but we cannot avoid everything we do not understand. Often, the things that trouble us most are unresolved issues that we have been avoiding. They may seem like darkness and something to be avoided, but they could be the key to our future well-being. In my book, Being a Journey Towards Presence and Authenticity, I described the process. Because I avoided these dark places within me, they all surfaced simultaneously. When they emerged, it was more traumatic to encounter them. When I finally faced the part of me that was wounded, I discovered that it was much more like a traumatized younger version of myself than a giant, horrible monster. I am not even sure that Satan and demons exist anymore. I now wonder if much of that imagery was created in our minds when we try to describe what it felt like on the inside. It is perfectly plausible that our internal demons are little more than internalized shame and unresolved trauma. Many times this surfaces as reactivity. Someone would say or do something that caused a reaction in me. I would react like something was controlling me, and in a sense, it was. A part of me was trying to resolve past hurts and unresolved feelings. Because I was reacting, my response was not rational, and often what I did only made it worse. The encounters usually ended up with me pushing the emotions down and returning to my life, where I ignored what seemed like darkness in search for new beacons of light and hope. Eventually, I could not push it down anymore. I had to face the darkness and bring it out. To make a long story short, because I made space for this traumatized little boy, that part of me was able to heal and I could move forward. I did not eradicate that part of me. I had compassion for it and I was present with it until the stuck part could shift to something more integrated. In my existence, and it was also integrated with my existence rather than being a part of me that was trying to get my attention. We call this process focusing.
So you mentioned that we have this, if you will, struggle with darkness and light. So since deconstructing from religion, do you see those hard parts of life? Do you still refer to them as darkness, or how do you refer to them now?
Not really. I can't remember if I used that word darkness in a long time. Sometimes I'm still in the habit of calling, people or groups or the way they're acting as, we used to call them that sinful
Mm.
or that's a dark place or that's
Mhm.
dark. They're dark, that kind of stuff. So some of those habits are still kind of in my vocabulary. That's kind of why I brought it up. But um, I don't see everything as darkness and light. It's certainly a bad thing if someone didn't take care of us or abused us when we were growing up, and that causes shadow.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely not a good thing. And I don't want to, dismiss it like we did in religion and ignore it and make light of it or anything like that. It's serious, but it's totally possible that, in my mind, that demons and hell and all that kind of stuff and all that those things we talked about as darkness was really just things we didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in the dark about it. It's darkness to us. Once you become enlightened, I think, to me, I want to compare it right now. This may not be the best comparison to my going on paranormal examinations, where there's a lot of talk about darkness and bad spirits and bad energy and so on. But going on those expeditions, going on those examinations, um, I understood that what it is it's some kind of energy or spirit, and to categorize it as, well, anything like that is bad. I mean, that's what makes it tough to deal with anything complicated like that we don't understand is if we just categorize it as bad, we're just so afraid something's going to jump on us like a virus and possess us and take over our lives and ruin our families, whatever our fears are, that's where we get into that light and darkness and so on. People still use the language of, light healers and people of light and so on when they're talking about different kinds of work outside of religion, and so I guess we're always going to have some of that language with us, but it's overkill in religion. It does more harm than good, in my opinion.
I think using it as, seeing, if you use the word darkness, seeing it kind of like you described is maybe it's what we don't know yet. But I think when we attach fear to that is when we are afraid to look at those things that we don't understand. You automatically see them as something evil rather than, truly examining it without the fear attached to it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So let's move on. Let's talk about a focusing method.
Okay.
A focusing method. I have mixed feelings about prescribing steps to people. Life is messy, nuanced, and hard to describe with a formula. Sometimes it's more helpful to describe our lives as journeys so that we can keep perspective on the many twists and turns to life. But sometimes we find valuable things and share them with each other. The trick is to avoid falling in love with methods, beliefs, techniques, or even practices. I've learned a lot about focusing from several people in Eugene Genlin's book of the same name. Dr. Paul Fitzgerald has been instrumental in my life and shared many ideas about focusing that have been revolutionary to my healing. Focusing can happen alone or with a companion. I recommend the latter, if possible, because an empathetic listener helps to improve the effectiveness of the focusing method. The method originates from Genlin, the founder of focusing, and has been utilized by many. So the first step is to prepare. Number one, preparation. Make sure that you are breathing deeply. If you've ever done a body scan in your meditation practice, use that method to let go of any felt tension and let it fall off. Some find it helpful to place their thoughts into a container. Imagine a box where I can put all my thoughts away, much like picking up toys at night. In addition to thoughts, I may notice feelings vying for my attention. I try not to judge them. I notice what I feel and where I feel it. The room should be quiet and free of distractions. At this point in the meditation, your guide might ask you to identify a word that best describes the feeling you are experiencing. This can help you to further understand and process your emotions during the practice.
So, talk to me a little bit about why you put breathing as an important first step.
Yeah, I just, I'm not sure, but I'm more and more convinced that breathing's a part of a lot of things.
Mm.
the spirit pneuma, Pneuma is the same where we get the word pneumonia,
Mhm.
right? So when they talk about the spirit of God, it's the breath of God. It's just and that just seems really important to me. I've heard our favorite yoga teacher say, besides uh, besides Tisha Liberty in town here, also our favorite other uh, yoga teacher is Yoga with Adrian,
Mhm.
Adrian Missler,
Right.
and she says it's all about the breath.
Mm.
And so yogis and people like that incorporate the breath, but I think it's it's regulation.
Yeah.
When you use your breath, it's regulating. And I see professional athletes anymore and all
Mhm.
kinds of people in tense situations just breathing
Mhm.
because focusing on your breath can regulate you, can
Mhm.
bring your animals shake or
Right.
whatever. It seems like breathing is that for us when we're trying to
Mhm. Yeah.
you know
Mhm.
and there's different kinds of breathing in yoga and so on, but it helps you regulate so that you
Mhm.
can, a lot of people have trouble with when they meditate of random thoughts,
Mhm.
and we wrestle with that.
Right.
But the breathing will help you get in a state that's conducive
Mhm.
um, to working on the inside.
If you can slow your breath down too, you can slow down your heart rate,
Mm-hmm.
um, maybe any anxious feelings you might be having,
Mm-hmm.
a lot. So I definitely agree with you. The benefits of breathing and being very intentional about those breaths
Mm-hmm.
is really important. So,
Let me ask you
oh yeah.
some. So, also, how did your breath get out of whack? How did your heart start beating faster? Those are root brain reactions
Mhm.
to what's going on in the world. So, we've got to kind of get in control
Mhm.
and get focused, and so the breathing helps.
So breathing is one aspect, but you talked about a body scan.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, first of all, how do you do that? And two, why is that important?
It seems to me like it's important to take the role of the observer when you're working with your body. And it's not how do I judge my body to be, how do I judge my present situation? It's not comparing to anybody else or anything like that, but it's observing.
Mm,
And so I hear people talk about that a lot about being taking the role of an observer. And when I do a body scan, it's just what do I notice?
mhm,
You know, where am I feeling the tension? Where am I feeling that part of me that's trying to get my attention?
mhm,
And after I've done whatever I can to relax and breathe out and push the negative out or push the anxiousness out, what's it helps you notice what's left.
mm,
What's still, trying to get my attention after this thing happened.
mhm,
And so about that to me, that's what a body scan does. It helps you be aware.
mhm,
What am I feeling? Where am I feeling it? And is that it? Is
mhm.
that, what would I call it? How would I, and we'll get into that later.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Number two, if my voice will get cleared up here, start working right, is called A Part of Me Feels. And I give credit to Dr. Fitzgerald that um, helped us discover this along with some Benedictine sisters. Um, he coined this phrase, a part of me feels. So it's helpful to state clearly, a part of me feels, and insert the tag that best describes your feelings. The critical part of the description is that it describes what you're feeling in your terms. It's also helpful to note that this feeling is not all of you, but it's a part of you trying to teach you something and hopefully resolve itself. So the companion might respond, so a part of you feels, in whatever you said. If you said, a part of me feels anxious, then that would be your feeling. And the companion might say, so a part of you feels anxious. And it's insert whatever, say whatever you said. So many times the person will continue with more detail about the feeling. continual focus should be on what the person is responsible for. So I can't blame it on whoever triggered me or what someone else did. I have to just own what I'm feeling and where I'm feeling it. Other people who contributed to the feeling are essential, but now but now it is most helpful to stay with what you are feeling and where you're feeling it. Peter Levine calls the feeling sensations, not emotions, and he describes the felt sense and mind-body connection. The felt sense, he says, is a medium through which we experience the fullness of sensations and knowledge of ourself. His somatic engineering is similar to focusing, and it helps increase, this is a quote, increase somatic or bodily awareness and intelligence, and to help us listen to all the ways our body communicates with us. So the companion may ask several times, is this still the correct handle to place on the feeling? It's okay if it changes several times, but when the feeling or emotion is identified, we can move forward. It's also very helpful to identify where we feel it in the emotion in the body or the sensation in the body and place a hand where we feel it. This may be in the throat, the heart, the gut, or other places throughout the body. Again, this may change places throughout the session. This is okay if we track it, but be present and refrain from judging what is there or where it is or anything about it. It has to be a non-judgment zone.
Talk a little bit more about somatic therapy or somatic healing because you've mentioned that quite a bit, not just on our podcast or in this course, but I know like when you're just talking to people, you really try to help them understand the importance of it.
Yeah. So I'm always talking about somatic healing, and I know Dr. Amy,
Mhm.
I can't think of her last name. She calls it parts work,
Mhm.
and Dr. Levine calls his somatic experiencing, and I parentheses the somatic with body
Mhm.
awareness. And to me, that's what it is. There's a lot of regulation that goes on in trauma work.
Mhm.
So regulation is one thing, but somatic body awareness helps you communicate with that part of you that's stored in your nervous system,
Mhm.
your body.
Right.
Um, and it seems to have an effect, and it's real kind of hard to explain.
Mhm.
We don't necessarily have to identify the exact thing that caused that trauma.
Mhm.
We don't even have to, have a diagnosis or anything like that. It's just that. So he says, I'll read what Peter Levine said again. Increasing body awareness, somatic awareness, and intelligence, and it helps you better listen to all of the way your body communicates with you. And he also uses another word in there called a felt sense. So you
Mhm.
have a felt sense of your younger self,
Mhm.
a felt sense of when you had the trauma and things like that. And when we experience those sensations, as he called them, or emotions, um, it it puts us in a better situation to be with that part of us
Mhm.
that that's still trying to resolve past trauma.
Mhm.
It's just it's saying I'm stuck here in a 5-year-old mindset
Mhm.
and root brain stuff and things that weren't even fully developed in my cortex yet.
Mhm.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just gonna, it reminds me so much of like what we talked about in our previous lesson, and having that compassion. And I feel like these steps, the somatic, the body scan, the breathing, that helps you really start to hone in to your intuitive self and to start having compassion for
Mm.
those parts of you that have been wounded.
Because the goal is we want to start responding instead of
Mhm.
just reacting.
Mhm.
And so being with those helps that.
Yeah.
Well, the third thing is to be with that feeling of or emotion. So that's number three. be with the feeling or emotion. So I've probably already said this already, but the companion might ask, what is it like to be with that part of you that feels anxious? And some people use the phrase, say hello. And usually when you tell people to say hello, they go, what did you say? What do you mean by that? And so acknowledge, right? Acknowledge the felt sense of a part of you. And that may let you know, you let it know that you're paying attention. So acknowledge them, right? Just like you
Mhm.
would a child. Uh, I understand that a part of you feels anxious, so I've acknowledged that. And can you just be with that part of you that feels that way
Mhm.
right now, just like you would with another child?
Mhm.
Often being present does not mean that we're not doing anything. I noticed this with my children. Sometimes my offspring were hurt and there was nothing I could do or say to help them. In those times, the best thing I could say or do was to just be there and be with them. In a sense, focusing is being with the part of us trying to share what we may not be able to describe with words. So, again, this step is not a judgment in determining whether the feeling is good or bad. We are not trying to categorize it as darkness or light, as we talked about before. In a way, we're just building a relationship with something inside us that needs our attention.
Mhm.
So, just a very simple thing. And I would imagine you felt that in your school classes
Mhm.
sometimes when a child's dysregulated and
Mhm.
traumatized and there's different levels based on different things,
Right.
but that I would imagine at times that you realize this person's just upset. This little
Mhm.
person's so upset, and there's not really anything you can do. In fact,
Mhm.
if you talk, you're going to cause more problems, right? They're going to
Right.
get more upset, and
Mhm.
they're not mad at you, but they're. So do you just sometimes just be with them
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
just sit with
Sometimes
them?
just be with them or, you know, like say it's perfectly okay, how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I might have to put some parameters around that. Like we can't throw things or hit people or, push our desk over. But it is, I give them permission. That might be kind of a strange way to say it, but I give them permission to feel whatever they're feeling.
Yeah, makes a
Um,
lot of sense.
and then, just either say, I've had this conversation even this year. Do you want to talk about this now? And if not now, we don't have to talk about it now. If you want to talk about it later,
Mm-hmm.
we can. So, giving them that freedom to decide, when they want to discuss what's really bothering them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So number four, then the next step is to invite interaction with inner characters. And that's sounding kind of scary now.
Mhm.
But sometimes I ask, tell me about the most recent time you felt this. Or maybe talk about the first time you felt this. And all trauma is not, going to be something in their past and so on. But usually they're kind of looking back, this has been a recurring thing.
Mhm.
And they could pull something from this. So often this opens up the root cause or the trauma or the wounding. Another helpful question might be, what is that part of you trying to tell you? Are you getting a sense of that part of you is trying to tell you something?
Mhm.
Um, allowing the person to interact with the felt sense in them helps them build stronger bonds with the inner child and the inner critic. At this point, you might ask, what would you do for that part of you if that was an actual child in front of you? Like we've said before, what if one of your students or what if one of your actual children
Mhm.
felt that way?
Mhm.
What would you say to them?
Mhm.
And sometimes that's one of the, we've talked about that already.
Yeah.
Sometimes the hard part is having that compassion for
Mhm.
parts of ourselves. Um, and when we think of it, well, what if one of the children in my classroom or
Mhm.
my nephew or niece or we're feeling that. What would we do?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's been a long time since our kids were kids, but they're getting so old. It's common for them to see this felt sense as an inner child that needs nurturing that it did not get. It's helpful for them to talk about what they could do, such as holding, telling, or feeling with them. The first time I focused alone, I kept telling my inner child, I've got your back. Along with the inner child, I knew that most will also encounter the inner critic. Some people call this the protector because that is what the original person might have been trying to do. Sometimes say most of us have an inner critic, and what is that voice telling you right now? And they almost always have an immediate response. They don't think about it very long because they know what that voice is saying. This is easy for most people because they're familiar with that voice that helps submerge the shadow. I invite them to step between the inner critic and the inner child. And sometimes they need to say something and sometimes not. But it is a stance in a way
Mm-hmm.
that says to the inner critic, it's also a part of you,
Mm-hmm.
that says, I'm not trying to get rid of you. I'm not trying to extinguish you.
Mm-hmm.
I know you have my best interest at heart. I know that original person that kind of embedded this inner critic in me was trying to protect me,
Mm-hmm.
but it didn't help. It didn't have, and so you say to them, say to that part of you, um, I just need you to stop right now
Mm-hmm.
because we're doing something important here. And, that may seem weird to some people, but it's definitely important. And almost every time we focus with somebody or I've done focusing and someone mentions the inner critic, we always know exactly what that part of us is saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's very clear, right?
Do you think that the inner critic is always a protector? Because sometimes I struggle with that a little bit, like because of I mean, sometimes the inner critic can be extremely negative and even say hurtful things like, why don't you just get over this right now?
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know. That's still something that I'm kind of mulling around if the inner critic, you know, like I feel like a protective inner critic would say something to me like, you need to make that situation right, or you need to do something about that.
Mhm.
Kind of like, you need to take responsibility or ownership or something like that.
Mhm.
But then sometimes and maybe it's not the inner critic, maybe it's something else that can be almost degrading, right? Can say
Mhm.
things like, you're being a baby. Like, why don't you just get over it?
Yeah.
And things like that. Would you consider that still an inner critic, or could that be just another voice?
Yeah. I would say most times its original intention was to try to protect us.
Mm,
And we've all had instances like that with other people
mm-hmm,
where something they were doing scared us or they were pushing limits we weren't pushing or whatever.
mm,
And we said, "Oh no, I want to protect them." Sometimes you do that with your kids. You try to dissuade them from something that's going to be really discouraging or they're
mm,
going to fail. Um, and so the initial thought was, I need to protect them, but it kind of comes off in a bunch of lopsided
mm-hmm,
ways. It comes out wrong. We get too intent on changing their mind and
mm-hmm,
so on. But I'm assuming we have lower brain things that protect us that just react,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
But I think we also have trauma in our bodies that says, well, one way to keep this all under control is just to be real critical, um, to keep everything locked down. Let's don't try things that are too hard and things
mm-hmm,
like that. So number 5 is connecting the dots. So often we help people connect the dots by saying, it's no wonder. And that means that's also a phrase that we've heard Dr. Paul use. It's no wonder. In other words, We want to let them know the connection between the past trauma and their current reactions. We don't want to excuse anything, but to let them relax and realize the part of them trying to tell them has been successful. Now the relationship with that part of them has changed. So it's also possible that what happens when a person focuses is hard to explain, and we don't need to feel compelled to understand any of it intellectually. Sometimes I feel like I have heard what the focuser is saying sincerely, and it makes me cry. Empathetic listening is essential to the process, but explaining what occurred may be more of a matter of future contemplation than a present day explanation. Sometimes we invite them to thank that part of them that revealed itself and came back into the room with us. It's essential to be empathetic and authentic in all of these things.
So an empathetic listener, what does an empathetic listener do? What do they sound like? How do they respond? Or do they say much of anything?
I think empathy means me too, right? So
Mm,
when you're listening to someone, they can get a sense that you've been down this road before, you understand their pain, you
mhm,
understand what they're going through and why it's traumatic and why they're having a hard time. So I would probably use compassion if I was going to rewrite that,
mm,
because compassion seems to come up in all these things. It's
mm,
so important because not only do we need to have compassion for the inner child, we need to have compassion for the inner critic.
mm.
And that was really hard for me to wrap my mind
Yeah,
around
me too.
in the beginning. But, think about our real parents and so on, we can have some compassion for them, even though they were trying to protect us and maybe did the wrong things.
Hmm.
We can still have some compassion for them. And I think compassion's going to be one of the most important words of the future. I
Mm,
think it just gets involved in everything. If we're hurt or if we're in a disagreement, can we still see that person's point of view and say, "Me too"? I understand that. I've thought that way.
hmm.
Or to just have some compassion for their situation, how they're arriving at the decisions they're arriving at. But yeah,
I
compassion,
think
authenticity.
I think a compassionate listener also, even if like like I mentioned in the previous chapter, or previous lesson, even if it's not your same story, I think it's important to be a compassionate listener with and
Mm,
believe the person that you're working with,
sure.
even if that's not your same story.
Yeah, that's not, and we could say that's not my experience, but I have compassion for you.
Hmm.
A lot of people say that to just ignore what you're saying.
Right. I think,
So
and I
that's
do
not
think you
my
have to be careful.
experience, and I don't want to go
Right.
there.
Kind of like what I said in the previous lesson,
Mhm.
we don't want to go, I'm sorry that happened to you, but that's not my experience. Sometimes I know one thing you talk about a lot is just not saying anything, but just like nodding and like, I hear you. I see you. I acknowledge what you're going through. This is really hard.
I remember with our granddaughters, I can't remember what it was. Something I'd had an accident or did something to hurt myself or something. And I remember Sloan saying, she went, "Oh," when something happens, let's say you uh, smash your finger under something, and she would go, "Oh," like compassionately,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but then she'd say, "Are you okay?" And she just automatically does that.
Mhm.
I think that's compassion,
Yeah.
that's empathy, and
Yeah.
she feels it right away.
Hmm. Hmm.
She hasn't been taught not to do that yet, and hopefully she'll keep doing it.
Right.
The next part I titled "The Next Courageous Step." This is the last of my part. Facing the shadow and darkness inside us can be terrifying. It can stop us in our tracks, especially if we try to consider all the steps required to get from point A to point Z. If we're fortunate, we can see the next step in front of us and take the next step courageously. It takes courage, then it makes us vulnerable. We can run, hide, fight, or we can take the next step. So one night on one of my birthdays, we left a hotel where we were staying to celebrate my birthday. There was an awkward step, and I took a roll on the concrete. Being in athletics as a kid kicked in, and I rolled pretty successfully. Weeks earlier, Laura stumbled on our porch, and she had bruises and painful side effects for weeks. I cannot predict how painful your next step will be, but it helps to take it soberly. It will take courage. It will make you vulnerable. It might even hurt a little bit, but it will be worth it. Understanding that I am of God opens me up to understanding that everything in nature and the cosmos seems to work toward a greater good. When I observe nature, I see that every cell, molecule, and subatomic particle is working towards reproduction, survival, and thriving. Through focusing, I deeply understand that my body is trying to heal itself from trauma. Like how it constantly fights against disease, it works to resolve trauma. Automatically, my body keeps me alive. It removes waste. It reproduces itself to thrive, adapt, and survive in my environment. I do not need to pray to God to fix me miraculously. The mechanisms are already in place. I need to pay attention. When my body communicates with me through emotion, pain, or pleasure, I can be present, learn from it, and respond to it. So I'm learning to trust my body more. It informs me and it transforms me.
Leaving organized religion has opened many opportunities to heal that were not encouraged inside the church. Don't get me wrong. When I was hurting inside the church, people offered some ideas to help relieve my suffering, such as praying more, reading my Bible more, fasting, or seeking Christian counseling. I tried all of the above. The thing about trauma, however, is that your nervous system holds on to those things that are triggering and traumatizing. Therefore, everything the church offered me as a fix to my trauma caused even more trauma. For me, the very thing that was causing my trauma was also trying to tell me how to fix it, with so many messages of shame, blame, and unworthiness weaved in. If I was not finding healing, it was because I was not doing something right or doing something enough when it came to the church's prescribed healing methods. As Karl explored his dark night of the soul, he found the practice of focusing. He was all too happy to share his findings with me. I was reluctant at first. It seemed kind of woo-woo, and it scared me, but not for the reasons you might think. It is incredibly uncomfortable to sit in your pain and acknowledge it. The body's response to trauma is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. If you are anything like me, when pain or trauma rears its ugly head, I get busy. If I am busy, I do not have to think about or deal with the pain. However, the nervous system does not forget. The activities may keep my mind on something else, but my nervous system is waiting until I lie my head on my pillow at night when it decides to reactivate with vengeance. It got so bad that going inside, focusing, and reacquainting myself with my wounded inner child was a final effort. Things I learned from focusing. Number 1, I learned to be still. Focusing forced me to sit. To focus correctly, you must be still. The idea is to focus on what is happening inside of you. So during those times of stillness, I could not be doing anything else that would cause my brain to once again stuff down the pain I needed to deal with. Number 2, I learned to breathe. That sounds silly, right? Doesn't our autonomic nervous system take care of that without us having to do anything? Sure, that's true. However, when focusing, I tune into and regulate my breath, breathing in through my nose, holding it at the top, and breathing out through my mouth. It is very intentional. That is the point. Our breathing becomes erratic when we are in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. This keeps us in a state of dysregulation. Intentional, focused breathing brings you back to a state of regulation. It is here that the healing work begins. Number 3, I learned to listen. When we are still and control our breathing, we begin to listen to our body and hear what it has been trying to communicate with us. For the first time, I could hear my inner child, that wounded part of me. I also listened to my inner critic. Focusing, however, helps you shift from ignoring those parts of you to actively listening to what they are trying to say. Number 4, I learned to thank those parts of me. This was tricky for me. For so long, I had scolded my inner child for being weak and my inner critic for being such a source of pain. Focusing helped me learn to thank both of those parts of myself. I thanked my inner child for telling me how she had felt incredibly rejected all these years. I could hold her and promise I would no longer abandon her for my inner critic. I learned to thank my inner critic for trying to protect me. By doing this, I could also regain the power I had given over to this critical voice, a power I could now use to make decisions in my healing journey. By softening the voice of my inner critic, I began to bring healing to my inner child. I also learned to see the part and not the whole. What I mean by this is a massive part of my healing was realizing that what was hurting or feeling was only a part of me, not all of me. Let me try to clarify. In the depths of my church trauma, the message I would constantly send myself was, I'm hurt, I'm scared, I'm invisible. It is increasingly overwhelming when you think this way because we say the whole person feels hurt, scared, or invisible. Trying to fix that feels impossible. With focusing, the language shifts to a part of me feels hurt, a part of me feels scared, or a part of me feels invisible. When we see these things as part, there is less shame. That part of us feels seen and heard. We can speak to where we feel it in our body. This was huge for me. I no longer felt like all of me was somehow defective. Focusing on one part of me makes the healing process less like an all or nothing paradigm. It allows me to shift that tsunami of shame that typically washed over me to a part of me that was holding on to shame in my body. Nothing inside me can offer comfort when all of me surrenders to shame. When a part of me is feeling shame or hurt, there's room for other parts of me to rush in and sit with and comfort that hurting part of me. Finally, I learned I am worth it. Focusing is a practice for me. We experience a religious culture where it was acceptable to put ourselves last and everything and everyone else ahead of us. Focusing has taught me that I cannot give others what I am unwilling to give myself. When you fly, they tell you that if there is a loss in cabin pressure and the oxygen masks fall, to put yours on first and then help your child. There is a reason they are adamant about that. You cannot help someone else if you are unconscious from a lack of oxygen. Dear listener, you are worth putting the oxygen mask on first. It is not selfish. It is self-care.
So one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking with that is if we talk about meditation and meditation practices, I would say that that's not generally your thing.
True.
And I'm the explorer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the one that goes on paranormal investigation and
Right.
tries to drag you into it and so on.
And then I'm traumatized.
But we have, I think we both have experienced focusing in its value, the somatic healing. We understand regulation because some of the things you're involved with, like the attachment and trauma network and such. and you understand more about how the brain works than I do.
Mhm.
And so we kind of feed off each other for those things and so on. But given that,
Mhm.
that you're leery of woo woo things, like you
Mhm.
mentioned,
Mhm.
that you may be skeptical by nature and so on. I'm like, if we don't try it, I won't know,
Right, right.
and that's a difference of
Mhm.
philosophy and so on. But your experience with focusing, uh, what was amazing about it or not amazing about it? What was your experience?
You know, like especially the breathing part for me, like I still, when I feel that anxiety coming up, I will still like breathe. I will still close my eyes and take some deep breaths, being more in tune with my body, like when I am feeling anxious and asking those questions. Okay, what I see that you're feeling anxious. I see that a part of you is feeling anxious. What are we feeling anxious about?
Mhm.
And you know, is this a like real fear to be concerned about? Or, you know, is my mind kind of regressing back to a time when, you know, that was a real fear, but is no longer a real fear in my life. So I think those things are still helpful for me today. Even if I was reluctant in doing it, there are so many benefits that I've found from doing it. And I may not practice meditation in the same ways that you do, but I find little pockets in my life where I do those things that we were just talking about that would be considered contemplative or meditation like. But I just think like being more aware of my body and knowing that it's just a part of me.
Mhm.
I think that was probably my biggest thing because
So, and I'm sorry to interrupt,
no.
but so if we have in the past gotten in a fight about nothing,
Mhm.
you know,
Well,
just like things, something would come up and something would trigger one of us,
right. I
and
feel like just it may seem like nothing, but obviously we had a reaction for a reason.
yeah, because it's
Yeah.
something.
Right.
And so I just want to know, and I promise I'll share one also, if you will.
Okay.
An experience you have with focusing, something that uncovered, or what was it like?
Mhm.
Just so people who are listening might get a little feel for it. They're still a little uneasy. They don't,
Mhm.
know whether they want to believe this or not. What was one of your experiences with focusing that's just yours? Not mine.
Yeah. I don't, I mean, I know I've done some focusing with, Dr. Paul. And honestly, the thing that was most healing for me was that part of a part of me feels,
Hmm.
because I would almost feel before learning that vocabulary and really applying that to situations where I was feeling anxious or scared or whatever. um it really felt incredibly overwhelming, because I did feel like all of me is feeling this way. And then in come the inner critic voices. You should be over this. Why are you dwelling on this? Why are you future tripping over that? So it became this huge like spiral downward is how I remember explaining it to Dr. Paul. It's just everything was crashing in, and then it was like the spiral, the shame spiral,
Hmm.
this overwhelming spiral of dread down until I almost like, and I don't want to use the word depressed, because I feel like that is a diagnosis and I don't want to take that lightly, but I did feel this like almost fear of moving or fear of doing anything, or this feeling that I really couldn't, or I wasn't worthy to do anything. It's really hard to explain,
Hmm.
but you know coming at it now
So
with
when
that
you're in that, so when
vocabulary.
you're in that spiral, the main goal is to get it over with,
Right.
right? It's make it go away,
Make it go away.
you know. And a lot of times what we do is regulate, right? Even
Mhm.
I think praying and religious settings is regulating, right?
Mhm.
Somebody puts their arm around you and you breathe
Mhm.
together and you
Mhm.
say some words and that regulates you, but it doesn't get to the issue, which is
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted
No,
you. Go ahead.
I mean, you're right. It doesn't get to the issue
Yeah.
at all.
So it's overwhelming, and then so by focusing on a part of you, how is that different? How did what did that
It's,
do?
to me, it's more manageable,
Okay.
right? It's kind of like take our kitchen, right? If we let the dishes pile up and pile up and pile up,
Talking about me, aren't you?
no, because I mean, this has happened a couple weekends and I'm just as capable on the weekends as doing the dishes as you are. But we kind of continue to walk by it and ignore it and we don't deal with it. Now, if we would just, after we finish eating a meal, take the one or two plates and one or two forks and one or two cups, rinse them off and put them in the dishwasher, then it doesn't seem so overwhelming. And so I guess that's how I would say that has shifted in my life is I don't I don't have all these thoughts of, and I mean I'm going to take that back. I do still have, that inner critic still rears her ugly head every once in a while. And I have that thought of, why are you still why are you still thinking about that? Or why are you still freaking out about that? But I am able to go, I have a right to, you know, be in this moment right now where I'm feeling a little bit anxious. There's that
Mhm.
part of me that feels it. So it's almost like all those years of not giving myself permission to feel, I'm now telling that inner critic, I hear you, I see you, but I have a right to feel this right now
Mhm.
and let me process it. And we're all going to be better for it if you just let me process it
Mhm.
rather than the words of shame and, just,
And you can cry now too. I mean,
yeah, I'm still working on that.
yeah, but I think that's one of the most amazing things. And then I think a lot of when you're doing your work, you kind of talked about it earlier, but just the fact of I'm not treating this inner child like I would any other child,
Hmm.
I'm not, and that
That was
became
a big
clear.
shift. Yeah.
That became
Hmm.
clear. But like you said, when you just, well, I'm sad or I'm depressed
Hmm.
or then it's too overwhelming
Right.
and it gets so then it's shame like I'm just totally screwed up,
Hmm.
and then the spiral and we just want it to get over with as
Hmm.
quick as we can.
And then when you're inside of organized religion, at least this was my experience, then you've got the shame of not being good enough and not praying enough and not reading your Bible enough and all this laundry list of things that you don't do well enough and that's probably why you are the mess that you are, you know.
So I promised I would give one also. So
Mhm.
I'll give you one.
Okay.
So Dr. Paul, I started focusing with the sisters
Mhm.
at the Benedictine
Mhm.
sisters of Atchison, Kansas. I was training to be a spiritual director, which is
Mhm.
different than you think, or maybe some people know what it is. But so I learned it from them, and then Dr. Paul, we did some sessions together later on in the process. And one day I was feeling overwhelmed by something. And then when we started to focus just on that, part of me feels
Mhm.
overwhelmed or
Mhm.
whatever. And he might have said something like, "When have you felt that before?" And then my mind automatically went to second grade
Mhm.
when I had to walk my younger siblings when I was
Mhm.
7 years old through the ice, which we
Mhm.
didn't experience in Oklahoma, the ice and freezing cold weather, and we kept falling down. And the overwhelming thought was, I can't do this.
Mhm.
I can't, be the leader. I'm only 7 years old, and
Mhm.
all that emotion came up. But when I'd sat with that and then cried, and
Mhm.
for me, it's always kind of, I call it weeping more than crying, but it touches that deep part. And
Mhm.
it seems like then something heals because
Mhm.
that part of you has been heard.
Mhm.
And it was tremendously helpful for me. And Sometimes it's real automatic like that. Sometimes it's a little harder. But we definitely, like we say, we don't want to give you 10 steps to be happy, those kind of things.
Right.
But we like this method, and a lot of other people are picking it up under the title of somatic healing,
Mm-hmm.
somatic therapies, and things like that. It's all really similar.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure someday they'll develop an official diagnosis and an official cure, practice, therapy,
Mhm.
whatever. But for now, it's real effective. It's
Mhm.
done more than anything else. And we should say that we do go to counseling,
Yep.
go to therapy with a trauma-informed therapist. And so
Who
does
asks
similar
you,
things.
yeah, she will ask. I know she's done this with me. I can just speak for myself, but where are you feeling that? When I bring up
Yeah.
something traumatic, where are you feeling that in your body? Yeah.
She'll say, why don't we just check in with our body, or something like that. If we've been discussing it already, it doesn't take very long. Then where you kind of make the connection and go, oh, that part of me feels that,
Right.
and then you can unpack it and be with it and have it work its magic.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have any action steps?
Yeah, we have some action steps for lesson 7. Okay, so our first action step is to listen to this method several times and begin to use the method to help you tune toward your body. And just remember that we're not giving you step-by-step instructions, so listen to what your body has to say.
If you don't already have one, start looking for a trauma-informed therapist that can help you as a witness and help make the mind-body connection. Avoid biblical counselors and other untrained individuals, as they sometimes create more problems than they solve. And I should say, we are not trained therapists either. If you come to us for focusing, we'll maybe do a session or two to help you get in touch with your body. And then we'll suggest that you find a trauma-informed counselor that's trained to follow through on all those things and work with you. And we know a lot of them, so we can help you. Anyway, that's it. On to lesson 8.
Yep, we'll see you in lesson 8.
Thanks.